My name is Lucas. I'm 25 years old and I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. Life here isn't particularly exciting. Rows of identical houses, neatly trimmed lawns, and neighbors who exchange polite waves but rarely stop to talk. It's the kind of place where you can hear the hum of a lawnmower on a Sunday morning or the faint bark of a dog from down the street. I live with my dad, Greg, and my stepmom, Helen. Dad's 58, a hard-working contractor who spends most of his time managing a local construction company. He's the kind of guy who's always on the move, rarely home before dinner, and even when he is, he's usually glued to his laptop, answering emails or reviewing blueprints. Helen is something else entirely. She came into our lives about 5 years ago. My mom passed away when I was 16, cancer, and for a long time, it was just Dad and me. We managed, but the house always felt empty. Dad didn't talk much about dating, and when he finally introduced Helen, it was a surprise to both of us. They'd met through mutual friends, and before I knew it, they were married. Helen's 47, though you'd never guess it. She has this effortless grace about her, the kind that turns heads without even trying. Her hair is a rich chestnut brown that falls in soft waves past her shoulders, and her eyes, God, her eyes, are this piercing shade of green that can make you forget what you were saying if she looks at you too long. She's always been kind to me, treating me more like a friend than a stepson, but there's always been this tension between us. I don't know when it started, but I do know it's only gotten stronger over the years. Maybe it's the way she carries herself, confident yet approachable. Maybe it's the way her laugh fills the room or the way she smiles when she catches me staring for a moment too long. Whatever it is, it's something I can't ignore. We live in a modest 2-story house, a white picket fence kind of place with a small garden in the front that Helen takes care of. She's always outside in the mornings, tending to her roses or pulling weeds, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail, wearing those fitted jeans that make it hard not to look. And then there's me. I work part-time at a local tech store, fixing phones and laptops, and I'm taking night classes to finish my degree in software engineering. Most days when I'm not at work or school, I'm in my room playing video games or scrolling through my phone. It's not much of a life, but it's comfortable. Or at least it was. That night, everything changed. At IT was a Thursday evening. Dad was away on one of his business trips, something that had become more frequent over the past year. Helen and I had settled into a comfortable routine whenever he was gone. She'd make dinner, we'd eat together, and then we'd retreat to our own spaces for the night. That evening, I was in my room, lying on my bed with my phone in hand, scrolling through videos as I was full of desires and playing with myself. The soft glow of the lamp on my nightstand cast a warm light across the room, and a playlist of mellow acoustic songs played in the background. A soft knock on my door broke the silence. "Lucas?" Helen's voice was gentle, almost hesitant. I was surprised as I forgot to lock my door, and I was just thinking this, and then the door opened, and there she was, standing in the doorway with that effortless grace she always seemed to carry. She caught me playing and wearing nothing on. "What are you doing?" she said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "Nothing," I said, trying to sound casual. She walked over, picking up my phone. My eyes followed her as he moved closer, her presence commanding the room without even trying. She sat down on the edge of my bed, her movements slow and deliberate. The mattress dipped slightly, and suddenly the air felt heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. "You've grown up so much," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine. There was something in her gaze, something warm yet searching. I swallowed hard, my heart beating faster. "Yeah, I guess." She reached out, her hand brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. The touch was light, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "Do you ever think about what you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" "In life," she said, her eyes holding mine. What makes you happy? What do you want for yourself? I hesitated, caught off guard by the question. I don't know, I admitted. I guess I've never really thought about it. Helen smiled, her hand lingering on my cheek for a moment before she pulled it away. You should. You deserve to be happy, Lucas. There was a pause, a silence that seemed to stretch endlessly between us. Her gaze softened, and before I could think, she leaned closer. The kiss was tentative at first, her lips brushing against mine in a way that felt both hesitant and deliberate. My breath caught, and for a moment I didn't move, too stunned to react. But then something shifted. My hand reached up, cupping her cheek as I leaned into the kiss, deepening it. Her lips were soft, warm, and they tasted faintly of the wine we'd had with dinner. My heart raced as her hands moved to my shoulders, pulling me closer. The world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of us in this small, intimate space. Her fingers trailed down my arms, her touch sending sparks through me. She pulled back slightly, her forehead resting against mine as we both caught our breath. This is wrong, she whispered, her voice trembling. Maybe, I said, my hand still on her cheek, but it doesn't feel wrong. Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment, it felt like she might pull away. But then she leaned in again, her lips capturing mine with more urgency this time. My hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer, feeling the warmth of her body against mine. Her hand slid up my chest, her touch both gentle and firm, as if she was memorizing every inch of me. It was a moment I knew I'd never forget. A moment that changed everything. Helen pulled away just enough to look at me, her green eyes filled with a mix of emotions, desire, hesitation, and something deeper that I couldn't quite name. Her breath was warm against my skin, and for a moment we just stayed like that, close enough to feel each other's heartbeat. This is dangerous, Lucas, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Your dad. I shook my head, cutting her off. He's never here, Helen. It's just us most of the time. Her lips parted as if to say something, but she hesitated. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the battle between what she knew was right and what she felt in her heart. This isn't just about him, she said finally. It's about us, about what this means. I reached for her hand, intertwining my fingers with hers. It doesn't have to mean anything, Helen. It's just us right here, right now. Her gaze softened and she let out a shaky breath. You make it sound so simple. Maybe it is, I said, my thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. She studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable, and then she leaned in again, her lips finding mine with a newfound determination. This kiss was different. Deeper, more intense, as if she'd finally let go of the barriers she'd been holding onto. Her hands moved to the back of my neck, pulling me closer as her body pressed against mine. I could feel the warmth of her skin. I dragged my hands towards her chest, pressing it gently and start kissing. Lucas, she murmured against my lips, her voice trembling. Yeah? Her hands trailed down my shoulders, her touch sending shivers through me. We shouldn't. But we are, I said, cutting her off again. And I don't want to stop. She pulled back slightly, her forehead resting against mine. You don't know what you're getting yourself into? Maybe not, I admitted, but I know what I feel. And I think you feel it too. Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I thought she might push me away. But then she smiled, a small, almost sad smile, and nodded. You're impossible, she said, her voice tinged with both exasperation and affection. Maybe, I said with a grin, but you like me anyway. Helen laughed softly, the sound like music to my ears. She shook her head, her hair brushing against my cheek. I don't know what I'm going to do with you. Start with tonight, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes flickered to my lips and she leaned in again, her kiss more confident this time. My hands moved to her waist, holding her close as the rest of the world faded away. That I woke up to the soft light of dawn streaming through the window. Helen was gone, but the faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air, a reminder of everything that had happened the night before. I lay there for a while, replaying every moment in my mind, the way she'd looked at me, the way she'd kissed me, the way her touch had felt like fire against my skin. It didn't feel real, and yet it was. Eventually, I got up and made my way downstairs. Helen was in the kitchen, her back to me as she stood at the counter, pouring herself a cup of coffee. She was wearing one of her usual casual outfits, a fitted blouse and jeans, but there was something different about her. "Morning," I said, my voice still groggy from sleep. She turned to look at me, her expression guarded but soft. "Morning," she replied, her voice calm but with an undertone of tension. I walked over to the counter and poured myself a cup of coffee, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. "Last night," she began, her voice trailing off. I looked at her, waiting for her to continue. "It can't happen again, Lucas," she said finally, her eyes meeting mine. "Why not?" I asked, my voice steady. She sighed, setting her cup down. "Because it's not right. Because it's complicated. Because you're scared," I said, cutting her off. Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment she didn't say anything. Then she let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "You're too smart for your own good, you know that?" "Maybe," I said with a small smile, "but I'm not wrong." She looked at me, her gaze softening. "No, you're not," she admitted. We stood there in silence for a moment, the air between us charged with the weight of everything unsaid. Finally she reached out, her hand brushing against mine. "Lucas," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't know where this is going, but I can't lose you." "You won't," I said, squeezing her hand gently. "I promise." The days after that night were like walking a tightrope. Helen and I both knew we'd crossed a line, one that couldn't easily be undone, but we also knew we weren't ready to let go of what had started between us. She kept her distance during the day, retreating to her usual routines, tending the garden, running errands, and preparing dinner with a calm, almost rehearsed demeanor. But in the evenings, when the house grew quiet and the shadows stretched long across the walls, she'd find reasons to linger. It started small, an extra glass of wine after dinner, a casual conversation that stretched late into the night. The barriers we'd built during the day would dissolve, replaced by a tension neither of us wanted to acknowledge aloud. It was a Friday night and Dad was still out of town. I had just finished a late-night snack and was rinsing my plate in the sink when I heard the soft padding of footsteps behind me. "Still up?" Helen's voice was warm but held a note of curiosity. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, dressed in a simple tank top and lounge pants. Her hair was pulled back loosely, and she looked effortlessly beautiful, the soft kitchen light casting a warm glow on her features. "Couldn't sleep," I said, drying my hands with a towel. She stepped closer, reaching into the cupboard to grab a glass. "You and your late-night habits," she teased, filling it with water. I leaned against the counter, watching her. There was something mesmerizing about the way she moved, graceful, confident, yet completely unassuming. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" I asked suddenly, the question surprising even myself. Helen paused, her hand resting on the counter as she looked at me. "Leaving? Why?" I shrugged. "I don't know. Sometimes it feels like there's more out there, you know? More than this town, this house, this life." She smiled faintly, her eyes thoughtful. "I've thought about it," she admitted. "But life has a way of keeping you where you are, even when you want to go." There was a wistfulness in her tone that made my chest tighten. I took a step closer, the distance between us shrinking. "You don't have to stay where you're not happy," I said softly. Her gaze flicked to mine, and for a moment, The air between us was thick with unspoken words. She set the glass down and turned to face me fully, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. "What about you?" she asked. "What's keeping you here?" "You," I said without hesitation. The words hung in the air and her expression shifted, a mix of surprise and something deeper. She took a step back, her back pressing against the counter as I moved closer. "Lucas, we can't keep—" "I know," I said, cutting her off gently. "But I don't want to pretend this isn't happening." She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "It's not that simple." "Maybe it is," I said, my voice steady. "You just have to let it be." Her breath hitched as I reached out, my hand brushing against her arm. The touch was light, tentative, but it sent a shiver through both of us. She didn't pull away, her eyes locked on mine as I stepped even closer. "Lucas?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, and before she could say more, I leaned in, my lips capturing hers in a kiss that was both tender and filled with unspoken longing. Her hands moved to my chest, not to push me away but to steady herself as the kiss deepened. Her fingers curled against the fabric of my shirt, pulling me closer as her body pressed against mine. The cool edge of the counter dug into her back, but neither of us seemed to care. The world outside the kitchen disappeared, leaving only the warmth of her touch and the fire ignited between us. When we finally pulled apart, her cheeks were flushed, her breathing uneven. She looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and vulnerability. "This is going to get us into so much trouble," she said, her voice trembling. "Maybe," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "but I'd risk it for you." She let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "You're impossible." "And you're worth it," I said, my hand lingering on her cheek. For a moment, she just looked at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Then, with a small, resigned smile, she leaned in again, her lips finding mine in a kiss that said everything words couldn't. With Dad away, the weekend felt like a bubble, separate from the real world where the rules didn't apply. Helen and I spent the days pretending everything was normal, but the evenings were ours, stolen moments filled with whispered conversations and soft touches. We'd sit on the couch together, her head resting on my shoulder as we watched old movies, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on my arm. Or we'd walk through the garden at dusk, the scent of roses filling the air as her hand brushed against mine, the simplest touch sending sparks through me. Each moment felt like a secret, something precious and fragile, and I knew it couldn't last. But for those 2 days, we let ourselves forget the consequences, lost in the warmth of each other's company.